I'm Keith Olbermann, and this is The Resistance. In the wake of last Friday's terrorist attack by another American against Americans at an American airport, at least 5 dead, at least 6 wounded, guns, gun terrorism, a reminder of all the things getting worse in this country that Trump will not even think of, let alone act against, in defense of the American people. His question would not be, how on earth have we let our country deteriorate to the point that the last 3 high-profile mass public shootings in this country, San Bernardino, the Orlando nightclub, the Fort Lauderdale airport, have been accomplished with legal weapons and with legal transportation of those weapons. His question would not be, how do we have a system by which anybody, international terrorist or non-denominational psychotic, who wants to kill a lot of people at an airport, can have the airline essentially deliver the guns and the ammunition to them as if they were ordering a pizza? His first question would be, in office. His first question will be, is it Muslims? His second question would be, in office, his second question will be, how can he exploit it to increase his power? His last question would be, in office, his last question will be, how can we make sure this latest nightmare does not infringe upon the holy Second Amendment? The Constitution, with all the amendments, is 7,820 words long. 2 of its clauses mention an exact value in cash and merchandise, and the word money appears 6 times in the Constitution, and coin 5 times. There are 10 references to taxes. 19 times you read duty or duties. The word debt appears 7 times, 5 uses of the word compensation, 2 imports, 2 exports, and the rest of it, the non-ownership parts stripped away. The rest of our United States Constitution and its amendments reads, profit paid, treasury, emoluments, revenue, imposts, excises, credit, commerce, bankruptcies, securities, exclusive right, purchased, capitation, commerce, revenue, treasury, appropriations, receipts, expenditures, profit, emolument, credit, gold, silver. Tender, payment, imposts, treasury, profit, emolument, bribery, lands, grants, forfeiture, fines, equity payment, pensions, bounties, pay, obligation, obligations, incomes, manufacture, sale, pay, value, owner, property, private property. Our Constitution is a property document. Our Constitution is about ownership. In the Constitution, the words vote, votes, and voting appear only 37 times. The words right and rights 15 times. Money and concepts concerning ownership 103 times. Our Constitution is first and foremost a property contract. When the government can own and must own and pay for, and what the people can own and when they must own and pay for it. It is noble, and most of it is held up flawlessly since 1787, and in some places it is sublime. But it does not read like the Declaration of Independence. Its closest relative is the contract you sign when you buy a car. So isn't it funny that in the Second Amendment, the second of all of them ever passed, the one about guns, it doesn't say anything about owning guns. A Constitution that actually mentions $10 and then $20, and yet there isn't one of those ownership or property or value words in the part about guns. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Which one of those words means own as opposed to being given possession of and retain? None of them. Which words in the part stating that the Second Amendment is about the well-regulated militia in a free state, which ones are unclear? None of them. The Second Amendment is there to keep state militias legally. It does this by keeping legal the rights of private citizens to bear arms for use in a militia. The Second Amendment guarantees the right to your state National Guard. It doesn't say a thing about prohibiting gun control. The Second Amendment is gun control. It may say you can bear a gun. It may even say you can keep a gun if you're using it as part of a well-regulated militia, but it does not say you can own one. And if you don't own that gun you're keeping and bearing, necessarily somebody else does own it, and by process of elimination, that somebody else has got to be the government. And therefore the Constitution starts with the idea that the government controls the guns, all the guns. And by the way, the arms mentioned in the Second Amendment, those presumably are muskets, not repeating rifles, not machine guns, not automatic killing devices. Saying the Founding Fathers wanted to protect your right to own an assault weapon is as stupid as saying they wanted to protect your right to own nuclear weapons. And we have a history of government gun control that stretches back to the 19th century, back to when the musket began the process of evolving into an Uzi. The so-called gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona, on October 26, 1881, the epitome of the Wild West, was about gun control. To prevent gun terrorism and deadly violence, it was illegal to carry a gun in Tombstone. And the Clantons and the McClorys were ignoring gun control, and the town marshals, the Earp brothers, were enforcing gun control. But of course, what does that matter? A man elected president dog-whistled throughout his campaign to the Second Amendment people. He's claimed he carries a gun at all times. He is fighting to keep a private bodyguard instead of relying solely on the Secret Service. His son, as reported last weekend in the Washington Post, is advocating for legislation to end the 9-month waiting period for silencers on guns and rifles. Oh, and the Second Amendment? This is settled law. The Supreme Court ruled in the Heller case in 2008, it doesn't matter if the words used are keep and bear arms rather than keep and own arms or own and bear arms. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is not the supreme being. While some cowardly politicians will wave the white flag and surrender to the false god of judicial supremacy, I refuse to light a match to our Constitution. We must resist and reject judicial tyranny, not retreat. Former Arkansas governor and frequent presidential aspirant Mike Huckabee wrote that. We've had too many examples in recent years of courts and judges legislating. They're not interpreting what the law says and whether someone was violated or not. In too many instances, they have been actually legislating by legal decree what they think the law should be, and that I don't go for. Speaking, the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Reagan. They said it. I didn't. Oh, and one more quote about the Supreme Court and the Second Amendment. The gun lobby's interpretation of the Second Amendment is one of the greatest pieces of fraud, I repeat the word fraud, on the American people by special interest groups that I have ever seen in my lifetime. The real purpose of the Second Amendment was to ensure that state armies, the militia, would be maintained for the defense of the state. The very language of the Second Amendment refutes any argument that it was intended to guarantee every citizen an unfettered right to any kind of weapon he or she desires. The writer adding, quote, "The Second Amendment doesn't guarantee the right to have firearms at all." Who wrote that? Warren Burger, Chief Justice of the United States from 1969 until 1986, appointed by Richard Nixon, a man who believed homosexual behavior could be prohibited by law, thought that sending a man to prison for life for writing a bad $100 check was just fine, believed in a strict constructionist reading of the Constitution. The Second Amendment does not guarantee the right to have firearms at all, he said. The excuses? Well, the excuses are hunting, protection against governmental tyranny, and the rights of the responsible gun owners. Bluntly, if you need 13 guns or an automatic weapon of some kind to kill any animal smaller than a kraken, you are no good at hunting. Take up another pastime. And about protection against governmental tyranny, ask the interned Japanese Americans of World War II how well that idea worked. And responsible gun owners? I'm sorry for them. But at this point, 7 gun terrorists have committed 7 gun massacres in the last 37 days in this country. This figure does not include the nearly 10% of all the presidents in our history who've been assassinated with guns, nor a 5th who was wounded, nor the 6th who was wounded while running for re-election, nor 7 others who survived significant assassination attempts by guns. That's 13 out of the 44 presidents, nearly 1/3 of them. The BBC noted that in Christmas 2015, we had 27 non-suicide gun deaths in this country. For the entire year 2015, England had 24 such deaths. Responsible gun ownership? That ship sailed long ago. And Trump will actively or passively call it back to port. To paraphrase Professor Lawrence B. Hickok of Western Reserve College, speaking of slavery a century and a half ago, the question now before the American citizens is no longer alone, can the schools and public places be made free of the risk of gun massacres? But are we free or are we slaves under gun mob law? Mob law, in which the man seizing the power of the government dog whistles to that mob, remember to bring your guns, or have the airline ship them for you. Resist. Peace.